Good evening. Hope you are all doing great. Today we are learning Maseches Sotah, Daf. What are we doing? Daf Gimel, and also Daf Dalet and Aleph. We're one block behind. We're going to be catching up tonight and tomorrow night. Over the course of the first days of Yantif, I'll make it work so that by the end of Yantif we're aligned. I think we have to do another blot and a half, basically every time we learn, because we're missing Erev Yantif, and then that's going to put us another blot behind. So we'll catch up in Mir Hashem by the end of Yantif. And then Sunday to Sunday, I'm out of town. Rabbi Robinson arranged for Rabbi Ruvain Handler to sub for me. So you're welcome to join him here in person. I will still be posting and recording. Even if you don't listen, I don't care. I'm just doing it to make sure that I actually learn something qualitative while I'm not with you. You are my mechayev, so I can't let myself escape the responsibility. And what? If I'm wearing a sweatshirt, no. If I'm wearing a regular shirt, then yes. It's not a very sophisticated conversation. It's just a very logistical.
Put it on the table. Nobody can see.
I usually crawl out of bed, make myself learn and record. So if that's happening, it's gonna be on WhatsApp. I can put it on Podbean if that's helpful, on podcasts if that's more helpful. Okay, that I can do. Compromise. It's called a podcast. It's
I know what a podcast is, but it's Podbean.
Podbean is just how I upload. Let's talk about real things. Let's get started.
Oh.
We are on Maseches Sotah, Gimel Amud Aleph, 3 lines down. We have a lot of ground to cover. A lot of this is straightforward and or agarata, so we're going to be moving pretty quickly. So please join me. Gimel Amud Aleph, 4 lines down. Tanya the Brisa writes, Hay Rabbi Meir Omer, Adam over Aver b'Seiser HaKadosh Baruch Hu machriz alav b'galui. That if a person does an Avera in private, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will reveal it in public, referring in this case to a Sotah. Shneimar v'avar lav ruach kina, and the word v'avar in another context, ve'in Avera, the language of Avar, ela lashon hachraza. Shneimar v'yitzav Moshe v'yaviru kol b'machane. Word v'yaviru was used to show that Moshe was making a proclamation in the community, and therefore we see that in our language of Avar lav ruach kina, that when it comes to a Sotah, that will in due time be revealed that she had done something inappropriate. Reish Lakish Amar Ein Adam over Averim Elim Kein Nichnas Ruach Shtus, a very well-known Gemara, that a person cannot do an Avera unless there's a Ruach Shtus that's Nichnas. If we had our faculties to us, we would never do anything wrong. No latitude to do anything wrong. Only when there's a Nichnas Ruach Shtus. Shnemar Ish Ki Siste Ishto, and the word Siste, a little play on words, is Sishte from the word Shote, Ksiv. That's what the word reads like. It's how it would have been vowelized, that we put vowels to it. The Brisa writes, getting back to some halachic aspects of the Gemara, which is, why is it that we believe one person to create a scenario where a Sotah is no longer a Sotah by saying that she slept with someone, as we saw the other day? Because we're not coming out of thin air. There's context. What's the context? Because she was warned by her husband. She was alone with this man, and we're going to be spending a lot of time today discussing what it means to be alone in regards to timing. And one aide was able to say that she was tmei, that she slept with someone. This is not so simple, because this is fascinating. If you look through the parsha of Sotah, you'll find that the language of vikine, that the husband was mekana his wife, is after the pasuk speaks about stira. So the chronology in the psukim looks like stira first, followed by tuma, followed by kinui. So Abaye says, Rav Papa says to Abaye, what are you talking about? It's out of order. Kinui is after stira. Says the Gemara, Amar Le, the language of avar is vikvar avar. The avar love ruach kina from a while back. Really, the psukim appear to be out of chronology, but the word avar is a historical word. It's a past tense word, and therefore the kinui was actually before the stira. Says the Gemara, Elameata, if that's true, third of the way down on Gimel Amud Aleph, then we have another pasuk speaking about soldiers going toward Va'avar lachem kol chalutz, crossing the Jordan, that all of these chalutzim, all of these pioneers, all of these soldiers are going to cross. Hachanami. Are you going to say here too that they crossed a long time ago? That doesn't fit with the next part of the pasuk. There, mashma de lehaba. There, the word Va'avar is implying something about the future. It says the Gemara, you're right. If in our case, by Sotah, if you looked at it the way that it was written, and really stira was first and kinui was later, that makes no sense. If the Ve'avar is found after she's already admittedly guilty, then what good does the kinui do? It has to be that the kinui is historical. So even though it's true, let's just solidify this point. When we read the Parshios of Sotah and we see that the kinui is after the stira and tuma, you're right, it doesn't appear right. But the word avar throws us back into history and says kinui was really before stira. We are halfway down. The Gemara says, Tana, the Brisa writes, Tana de Rabbi Shmuel, Ein Adam Mekana Leishto Elam Kein Nichnas Bo Ruach, that a person will not be Mekana, will not warn his wife unless he has some type of spirit enter into him. Shne'emar V'avar Alav Ruach Kina V'Kineis Ishto, because it says V'avar Alav Ruach. So the Gemara says, my Ruach, what kind of Ruach has gotten into him? What was hitting him? Says the Gemara, Rabbanan Amre Ruach Tuma, Sitra Achra. And says Rav Ashi, no, Rav Ashi Amar Ruach Tara. No, it was L'Shem Shamayim. He wanted to have a kadosh home. He wanted his house to be shalim. He wanted his wife to be honest and to be dedicated and to be monogamous. He didn't want her to be doing things like this. Like that's not healthy. So maybe it was a Ruach Tara. And the Gemara says the Tanya. Mistabra says the Gemara, Mistabra Commander Amar Ruach Tara. It's probably likely that Rav Ashi is right. Why is that true? Because the Tanya, the Brisa writes, V'Kineis Ishto Ruach Rishus, that a husband is allowed but not obligated to be Makana es Ishto when he suspects something, Rabbi Shmuel, but Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova that it is an obligation to be Makana. Now, Yamris Bishlam Ruach Tara Shapir. I could understand in regards to the machlokas of Rishus versus Chiyuv if in fact it's a Ruach Tara. But says the Gemara, Yamris Ruach Tuma, if in fact the reason why he's being Makana is because he has negative feelings, Sitra Achra, Rishus v'Chova le'iyule le'inish Ruach Tuma benafshe. We're going to have a machlokas if this ruach tuma is lechatchila b'di'evet. That's not shaykh. It can be completely forbidden. So it must therefore be that the ruach that the husband is having is a ruach tahara. He wants his house to be shalom. He wants his house to be peaceful. He wants his wife to be honest, and therefore it's a ruach tahara, and that makes sense in the brisa. Now, this machlokas that we just had between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva in regards to whether or not this is a rishus or chova, to be makana es ishto as a chova, we're now going to see that there really are three machlokos between these two amoraim, these two tanaim, that are very similar, and then we're going to analyze them 2/3 of the way down. Gufa, the kineis ishto rishus to Rabbi Yishmael, like we just saw, Rabbi Akiva omer chova. We saw there's a machlokas tanaim between Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Akiva as to whether or not being makana one's wife is a rishus, that was Rabbi Yishmael, or if it's a chova like Rabbi Akiva. And we have another machlokas as well, la yitama. We know by a kohen in regards to him becoming tamid to one of his family members, that is rishus to Rabbi Yishmael. So what that means that you have an option. It's optional. If you're a kohen and one of the immediate family members pass away, it's an option. You're not required to become tamid. Odd. That's not how we typically look at it. We look at it like Rabbi Akiva does. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. It is an obligation for a husband to bury his immediate loved ones, for a kohen to bury his immediate loved ones. And then the third machlokas between Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva is as follows: Lo olam behem ta'avodu, a din by having a non-Jewish slave, rishus, there to keep them forever is a rishus, but not an obligation. And Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova that it is an obligation to keep the slave forever. You're never allowed to free them. Three machlokos seemingly very similar. Amar le Rav Papa le Abaye. This is the same two people talking. We just saw above that Rav Papa was talking to Abaye. Amar le Rav Papa le Abaye says, wait 1 second. Amri la Rav Mashar Shel Rava. We're not exactly sure who said it. And says Gemara, wait, Lema Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva, b'chol Torah kula hachi pligi. Do Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva have this machlokas as a theme throughout all of Torah? That whenever the Torah says you're allowed to do a mitzvah, Rabbi Shmuel says it's a rishus, and Rabbi Akiva says it's a chova. That pasha can't be. That means every mitzvah, do you have to put on tefillin? It's a rishus. Paskin like Rabbi Shmuel, I'm not putting them on today. That's for sure not how we paskin. We're obligated to do mitzvahs aseh. We're obligated. There are some that we don't pursue. There's a mitzvah to get divorced. We don't pursue the mitzvah to get divorced. It's a mitzvah aseh, fine. But these three mitzvahs that were listed are the ones that are listed as rishus versus chova. Demarama rishus, marama chova. So it says it can't be that that's the case. Ella hacha. In these three cases, in the case that we have by Sotah, in the case that we have by Tuma, and in the case that we have by the Eved, who's a goy, we have a machlokas between these two tanoim. The template that we're going to see is the same 3 times in a row in regards to these three machlokos. It's all about psuk and pli. And says the Gemara, 15-20 lines from the bottom, Mekines ishto rishus direi Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova. What about the machlokas that we saw in regards to being mekana one's spouse? So there we said that Rabbi Yishmael holds that it is a rishus, and Rabbi Akiva holds that it's a chova. So okay, so my time with Rabbi Yishmael, why does Rabbi Yishmael say that it's only a rishus, that a husband is not obligated to be mekana his wife when he suspects something? Because savar lo ki haytana detanya, because Rabbi Yishmael holds like the following author of a brisa, which is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer Klapesha Amra Torah Lo Sisnai Sachicha Bilbabecha Yachol Kigonzu. We know that the Torah tells us you're not allowed to have hatred in your heart for anybody, and you seem to be a little bit upset at your wife to the point that you're saying Al Tadabri, Al Tistatri, and Ploni. So that doesn't look right. Tamalomar Vavar La Ruchina Bikines Ishto. Oh, so we see that it's allowed. It's a matir on the isra of lo sisna sachicha bilvavecha. You might have thought that you can't be makana your wife, you can't tell her to not speak to someone because it's lo sisna sachicha. Your feelings toward her are very negative. It says the Gemara, we have a matir. Don't worry, the pasuk says it's allowed. So it's only a rishus. It's not a chova. What does Rabbi Akiva say to Rabbi Shmuel? Incorrect. Kinui achrina ksiv. 10 lines from the bottom. He says that it says kinui twice. It says the kinei is esishto. Where's the pasuk? And then it says ruach kina, the kinei esishto. It says it twice in the same pasuk, the kinei esishto. That is in Bamidbar Perikei pasuk Yudalet. So therefore, because it says it twice, one is a matir to override lo sistan sechicha bil babecha, and the other is to make it a chiyu. They're obligated. That's where Rabbi Akiva gets his shita from Machlokes, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. What would Rabbi Shmuel say about this extra use of a kinei esishto? He says, "I did the vayin lemichta v'hi nitma v'hi lo nitma ksivnami v'kinei esishto." He says, no. The Torah refers to two types of women. One is v'hi nitma, she actually was guilty, and the other is v'hi lo nitma, and she really didn't do anything wrong. So in those two cases, we have a kinei ishto in both cases, one for each one. But the words v'kinei ishto were really not extra. So that the Gemara says is based on a principle that we have, that there are no extra words in Chumash. So really, when it says v'hi nitma and v'hi lo nitma, both of those cases were warranted. How do we know that to be true? Because the Gemara says, the Tana debate Rabbi Shmuel, 4 lines before the wide lines. Whenever you have something in the Torah that's written and repeated, it's only repeated because of something that's new. So therefore, we had the case of v'hi nitma, we needed that case, and we had the case of v'hi lo nitma, a case where she was innocent and a case where she was guilty. And in each case, we attached the words v'kinei esishto because she deserved kinui in both cases. We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. So therefore, nothing is extra. You can't make a drasha from there. And Rabbi Shmuel keeps his shita that he holds that b'kinei esishto is a rishus. Rabbi Akiva holds his shita that it is a chova. Let's go on to the second case where they have a machlokas, which is lo yitama, where we see that there's a machlokas about a kohen becoming tamei for his immediate relatives, and there we said Divrei Rabbi Shmuel that rishus Divrei Rabbi Shmuel that it's only a rishus. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva Omer Chova, he says that you're obligated to become tamei for your immediate relatives. Says the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Shmuel. Why does Rabbi Shmuel say when it comes to lo yitama by the obligation or the seeming obligation for a kohen to become tamei for his immediate family members? Why does he say that it's only a rishus? The Gemara says 3 lines from the bottom because I did dichsiv, because the pasuk says emor la kohanim bnei Aaron ve'amarta lehem lenefesh lo yitama be'amav itzrecha lemichtav lo yitama. So therefore, we had to have an extra pasuk here to indicate to us that it is only a rishus. And says the Gemara, Rabbi Akiva, no, we learned that out from that a kohen is allowed to become tamei from the michi'im lishero, from the pasuk of ki'im lishero nafka, and therefore lo yitama, that extra phrase lamali, that's the chova to teach us that their taka is a chova for the kohen to become tamei for an immediate family member, and it's not a rishus. Rabbi Shmuel, what does he do with la mitama? He says la mitama and ve'ein mitame la'evareha. That yes, you're allowed to become tamei to the mace, but you're not allowed to become tamei for a limb of a mace. Rahman al-Islam, if there's an amputation and the leg has to be buried, so maybe it's his family member, but he's not allowed to go to that burial of the limb because that's not where the tomb is. So the word law is taken. Therefore, whereas Rabbi Akiva uses the word law to teach us that there's a chova for the kohen to become tamei for his immediate family member, Rabbi Shmuel says that word's already used and you cannot bring out a case of chova. Here too, they hold their party lines, and we're on the top of Gimel Amud Beis, and we're still continuing to understand the sheet of Rabbi Akiva within the world of Lo Yitama. So Rabbi Akiva says on the top of Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Akiva, Im Kein Lichtov Rachmana Lav Lishtov. According to what you're saying, it should have just said the word law and leave it alone, Rabbi Shmuel. No need for anything else. Leave out the word Yitama. Yitama Lamali Shmami. Know that I'm right, says Rabbi Akiva, that it must be that there's an absolute chiyuv for a kohen to become tamei for his family members. What does Rabbi Shmuel say back to that? Second line, Rabbi Shmuel, he says that's not a good argument. I did the chasav law, chasav nami yitama. We needed both words, and each of them taught me something unique. And one of them taught me, the law taught us, as we saw earlier, was the din about the eva reha. And mitama only teaches me the din that he's allowed to become tamei, but not that it's an obligation. And here he quotes the same brisa. As mentioned, all 3 of these cases have the same templating. So here he says the same thing. Each of these words is necessary. The Tana Rabbi Shmuel called Parsha Shnei V'Nishnes. Anytime the Torah repeats anything, lo nishnes el b'shvil davar shenischadeish ba. And therefore, these cases, each of them teach us something unique. And therefore, Rabbi Shmuel still holds that a kohen is allowed but not required to become tamei for an immediately family member. But Rabbi Akiva holds that's not true. It's an absolute chiyuv. And let's move on to case number 3, where they share a machlokas, and that's the olam b'hem d'avodu, where there's an eved who's a goy. So the Gemara says rishus that Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that it's only a rishus in regards to keeping them forever. Rabbi Akiva Omer Chover, that you're obligated to keep them forever. My time is Rabbi Shmuel. Why does Rabbi Shmuel say that it's only a rishus? Because I did dichsiv lo sechaya kol neshama, back to the din that we haven't spoken about in this Masechta, but we have in Shas, which is that the Shiva Amim, the 7 nations which used to live in Eretz Yisrael, we had an obligation to destroy all of them. That's the pasuk, Lo Sechaya Kol Neshama, we were obligated to wipe them out. Says the Gemara, says Rabbi Shmuel, we needed also to have the words la'olam b'hem ta'avodu to teach us the chiddush. The Mishrei, to allow us, 10 lines down, echad mikol ha'umo, someone who's not one of the Sheva Amimim, a regular guy who's not part of the Sheva Amimim, sheba la Kananis, who fathered a child with a Canaanist, one of the Sheva Amimim, the holy mimena ben, and this Canaanist, who really we should have wiped her out, but we didn't, and she had a baby from a man who is not part of the Sheva Amimim. The halacha is rishai leknoso. You're allowed to make a kinyan on that person. The Tanya, the Brisa writes, how do we know that if a man who was not part of Sheva Amimim cohabited with a woman who was part of Sheva Amimim, that the ben is not part of the din of lo sechayeh kol neshama, you're allowed to keep him alive, because the pasuk says in Chumash that way, that as long as the husband is a non-Shiva Amamin father, then even though the mother is a Shiva Amamin woman, it doesn't matter. The kid can still be purchased as an eved. Yochel, you might have thought the reverse. What if Afa Kanani Shabal Achas Min Umos? Let's say the man was a Kanani, one of the Shiva Amamin, and the woman was not. She was a regular woman. You might have thought that maybe if the father was an Eved, the father was from Shiva Amamin, and the mother was not, the baby has the din like the mother. Incorrect. No, you're not allowed to do that. If the father of the baby was a Kanani, even though the mother was not, so the din is that we follow the father's status. This is room for where people sprach in patrilineal descent. It's sheker v'chazav. That's not what this din is talking about. We're not talking about Jewish status. The baby's a goy d'oraisa under all circumstances because both parents are goyim. That's not what we're talking about. But these are you'll find the Reform rabbis and conservative rabbis saying patrilineal descent is mutter from these kinds of sources, and those are the erudite ones. The ones who are not so erudite just say the times have changed, which is not even a very good argument. Therefore, I can eat pork. I can decide that any din in Chumash I don't want to keep anymore because it doesn't work for me. Crazy. Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. What does Rabbi Akiva say back? Because now this is all Rabbi Shmuel's argument. Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that the reason why the psukim are the way they are is to teach us that, yes, you're taka allowed to purchase an eved if the mother is a Canaanist and the father is from the Minha Umos Olam, one of the non-Shiva Amim nations. So that's what the pasuk was for Rabbi Akiva. He said, I already learned that. I already learned that from another pasuk. That mehem tiknu nafka. And therefore, L'olam hem tavodu lamali. What then is the pasuk L'olam hem tavodu? Says the Gemara that it's a chova, that I'm obligated to keep them forever and I can never free them. Rabbi Shmuel, what does he say? Bahem v'lo ba'achechem. No, he says that's teaching me something else, that there's a din of bahem by the goy, but not by a yid. So therefore, Rabbi Shmuel says you can't use the pasuk the way you did, and therefore I maintain my opinion, like Rabbi Shmuel says, that it's a rishus and not a chova. Rabbi Akiva, back and forth. Rabbi Akiva says, "Ba'achechem," he say for the Kran Nafka. He says in regards to Jews that we already know. Ba'achechem b'nei Yisrael ish be'echav lo sir debo b'farach. We know that you can't do that by a Jew already. So Rabbi Akiva says your pasuk that you're trying to say is not available for me. You're wrong. The pasuk of l'olam hem tavodu is available, and therefore I would hold, like I've been saying, that l'olam hem tavodu is a chiyuv that you're obligated to keep them enslaved. Rabbi Shmuel, what would he say? I did chsivu ba'achechem ksiv nami b'hem. We need both psukim. L'chid Tana Rabbi Shmuel, like we're seeing for the third time today. The Tana Rabbi Shmuel kol parsha shnam b'nishnes b'nishnes al b'shvil davar shenis chadesh ba. That every pasuk has something specific to learn, and Rabbi Akiva is wrong, and Rabbi Shmuel is right. And there are three machlokos are very, very similar in all three of these cases. Again, let's just review. It's a lot of details, but let's review the three cases and summarize cleanly. We first saw machlokas in regards to kinui, machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel said for a husband to be makana his wife and to warn her, it's a rishus and not a chiv. Rabbi Akiva says it's a chiv and not a rishus. Machlokas, we explained the Mara Makomos. Then we saw the din of lo yitama, that a kohen may or may not be required to become tameh for his immediate family members mentioned in the Torah. And Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that it's a rishus. The kohen does not have to go to that funeral. And Rabbi Akiva said, absolutely, you're wrong. When the Torah gives you the opportunity to do that, it's not a matir, it's a mechayev, and you're obligated to go to that funeral. And last but not least, the din of lo bahem ta'avodu, the din of a goy who's an eved. So there we saw machlokas Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Akiva in regards to whether or not it's a rishus or a chova, and there too we explained all the Mara Makomos. Rabbi Shmuel was of the opinion that it's a rishus to hold on to that eved. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that it's a chiyuv to hold on to that eved. We're more than halfway down. We're about 4 lines before the wide lines, getting back into some difficult gemaras to explain. These are the gemaras you have to be careful about, talking about them outside of the context of the 4 walls of a base medrash. We're going to learn a Rashi to clarify things here as well. Says the Gemara as follows: Amar Rav Chizda, znusa bebeisa kikari l'shum shana. That when there is nus in a house, It's like sesame that has worms in it, which is you just got to get rid of all the sesame. There's no way to solve for it. When there's anger in a house, there too, it's like worms that have gotten into the sesame bag. And both of this is only true when we're talking about a woman, when znus is in a house and when anger is in a house. And that's why these gemaras you have to understand them al pi the rishonim. You don't want people to abuse our Gemara, and you also don't want them to deal with apologetics. So let's see what the Rishonim say. We don't need to wax poetic. We have Rashi. Thank God we have Rashi back. So let's just look back in Rashi. Rashi is about halfway down. Karya we saw Tolah shel shumshemin ha'ochalton kachaz nus mechareves es habayis. So too, if there's nus from the wife, that it ruins the house. Tukva is kas, is anger, and the Gemara said idi both of these. Tukva was nusa de amrinon the mechareves es habayis. They apply beitza. Why? Because kshaisha mizana o ka'asanis, when a woman is, if she's mizana, if she's cheating, or if she is a ka'asanis, she's a ba'alas ka'as. Lifisha isha misasekes biznuneha ve'ena osem malachta. When a woman is doing these things, she's focusing on her own self. She's not focusing on the home. Ve'ena osem malachta. She's not taking care of her home. V'lo meshameres beisa. She's not taking care of the house at all. Umafkeres es shel baila lemenafim. And she gives over her husband's money to the menafim, to the men that she's cheating with. Now, this was just not the same profile. At that time, men were not in charge of the homes. There was no 2023, even Steven, I do this, you do that. Everything was not 50-50. It just wasn't like that. It wasn't the culture at all. It's just stay-at-home dads was not a thing. It's not common now either, but it certainly wasn't common then. So that's why the Gemara is not talking here. It's less bad if the husband does it. That's not what it means. It's just saying we're talking tachlis. Who's running the house? If she's running the house, it's worse for the house. So let's just be clear what's going on here. And these Gemaras often get quoted out of context. Next, first of the very long lines. Before the Jewish people did any averas, Rashi here highlights be'arayos. What a darga that all of the Jewish people had the Shechina. They knew what was going on. Shneimar, Kadosh Baruch Hu was with all of the Jews. Once they started doing some averas with arayos, the Shechina left them. Shneimar, that when a Kadosh Baruch Hu sees that you're doing bad things, he leaves you. Amar Reb Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amar Reb Yonasan, Kol Oseh Mitzvah Achas B'Olam Hazeh. Anyone who does even one mitzvah B'Olam Hazeh, and we Jews are Malei Mitzvos Kerimon, even the slackers among us. Huh? Afilu Reikim Shaban, right? And that's even for the slackers. So Mikadam Tov V'Holechas Lefanav B'Olam Haba. When we do a mitzvah, it's FedEx all the way up to Shamayim, way before we get there. However, that your righteousness goes before you. But anyone who does an avera, even one in this world, it surrounds you. The Rashi says korachto, that it's like wrapped up in you, it's bound to you, and it joins you when you go up to Shamayim. That's an image. Shenemar, Yolafto orchos derachim yalu b'so v'yovedu. That Yolafto, it wraps up with you orchos derachim on your way, and it will go up yalu b'sohu v'yovedu. It will go up into the heavens and v'yovedu, and you will be lost. Rabbi Eliezer Omer that these averos, especially by znus, so he says kshura bo kekelev. It's attached to you like a dog is attached to its master. Healed, always by the side. Shneimar, lo shamay le lishka betzla liyosima. The pasuk by Yosef says that he didn't listen to her. Lishka betzla, to sleep with her. Liyosima, and to be with her. Strange double language. The Gemara clarifies. Lishka betzla ba'olam hazeh. If you sleep with her, then there's an avera certainly down here. And liyosima la'olam haba. And if you violate that avera, it's going to join you up in the next world as well. These are not the things that we want. Any avera we want to avoid. Certainly this. Okay, end of the Agaritas for today. A little bit of the thinking cap. The Gemara says, Tanan Hasam, we have a Mishnah that seems to indicate the opposite of what we learned yesterday. What did we learn yesterday? We learned that one person can undo a Sotah scenario. That when it comes to Tuma, when a man says, I saw that woman sleep with that man, she's no longer a Sotah. She's not drinking the Mei Sotah anymore. Why? Because there's no Sveikos anymore. Rabbi Muscat asked me this morning, Danny Muscat said, what's a Vadai Sotah? A Vadai Sotah is someone who is besuffic about znus. And a suffix Sotah is a woman who likely cohabited. It's a funny flip of language. So the Vadai Sotah, you're not a Vadai Sotah if we know that you slept with someone. So Ba'atzim, you're besuffic about it. So it says the Gemara, how do we really know that this is the case? Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe we should assume that you need two Eidim for Tumah. We need two Eidim to indicate that a woman in fact slept with a man, and one would be insufficient. Shahaya b'din, it would be logical to assume so. How do we know? It says the Gemara 3/4 of the way down, 8 lines or so into the wide lines at the end of the line. Uma edus harishona which, as we will see at the very bottom of this page, Edus HaRishon is referring to stira, when she's actually alone with the man. There, She'eno Sarta Isser Olam, there it doesn't necessarily create an Isser Olam, because the Sotah can solve for her. And there, Enemis Kayamas B'Pachos Mishnayim, there the Rishonim, the Tanaim agree that we need two Edim. So then Edus HaAchrona, about the Tumah, when she might have slept with him, She'o Sarta Isser Olam, if we find out she actually slept with someone, then it's an Isser Olam. There, Eno Din, Shelo Tiskayim B'Pachos Mishnayim. How can you say that one Eid is sufficient? If you have two Edim by stira, if you have two Edim by stira, there's no reason that you should have one aid by tuma. Says the Gemara, that this far is really not correct. The aid ain't ba kol sheyesh ba. No thanks, I'm good. That any one person can be the machriya here in this based on a pasuk in Chumash. Thank you. That's what the Gemara says. But now says the Gemara, I can flip it on its head. I can give you the exact opposite svara to teach us that by stira we need one. How does that work? When we talk about tuma, when we talk about her actually sleeping with a man, if in fact the pasuk is right when it says ve'ed ein ba, that even one aid is sufficient to determine that she's no longer a sotah because she slept with somebody, then edus harishonim, when we talk about stira, when we talk about just being alone with him, she'eino sarta isser olam, eino din shediskain be'ed echad. This beautiful svara. If you're telling me that from the pasuk we only need one person to determine that if in fact she slept with someone, then I should only need one person to determine if she was nistar with someone. It's a lesser isser. It's a lower issue. It should be easy. Talmud Omar, we think down here with our own logic, we're wrong. The Pesukim and Chumash don't say what we think. The Torah says if we find that there's an erbas davar, lahalan hu omer, we see later al pishnaim edim or al pishlosha edim yakum davar ma davar ha'amor lahalan al pishnaim edim. Just like elsewhere, not in regards to Sotah, we have a din of Shnei Edim. Afkan, in regards to Stira, Al Pi Shnaim. So here, this is just a reminder that we think we understand, and we don't. I did a circumcision this past week for a religious Christian family. Super, super, super respectful. They've never met an Orthodox Jew before. We were going through their cabinets. It was great. We had a great time. So they were respectful, but other people that I've met with were not so respectful. They're quoting chapter and verse, and you think you have pshat and chumash just because you did. Let's just say in our terms, you did Shnai Mikra. That doesn't mean you know psukim and chumash. We have huge machlokos tanoim, amoraim, rishonim, achronim in regards to pshat and psukim. That leads to psak halacha. We don't have the right to interpret psukim on our own. That's why we need these gemaras. Al pi pashtus, I would have thought that if one aid is sufficient to say that a woman slept with a man, and therefore she's not a sotah, then l'chora I would have only need one aid to say that she was in yichud with a person. You're wrong. That's just not what the pasuk means. So let's analyze this and try and understand what's going on. 8 lines from the bottom. Says the Gemara, this idea that we might need 2 aidim for determining that this, what was this for? By stira, says the Gemara, that's michi matzaba ervas davar nafka. That we learned out from michi matzaba ervas davar, that we need 2 people. Says the Gemara, no, what are you talking about? We learned about stira yesterday, mi ba nafka, ba v'lo b'kinui, ba v'lo b'stira, mi baile, that we know that there's 2 aidim from the pasuk in ba. Says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Hachi nami kamar, you're right. Talmud lomar ba, that's what we learned yesterday, that ba is v'lo b'kinui, v'lo b'stira. That we learned that yesterday, we learned from the word ba that we need 2 eidim by kinui and stira, and it's based on the word ba. So what about Vituma be'alma? What about a case of znus, where there was no warning and there was stira, of course, but there was no warning from the husband? So there says the Gemara, Vituma be'alma below kinui below stira, delo mehemen eid echad menolan. How do we know that if eid echad shows up and he goes to the guy in shul and says, I know your wife did something, that we don't even believe this person? 1 aid is insufficient for adultery in general, but is sufficient by sotah. Huge difference. This came up yesterday. This came up on Shabbos' Daf. So says the Gemara, Ne'emar kan ki matzba erbas davar, v'ne'emar lahalan al pi shnei edim, o al pi shlosh edim yakum davar. Ma davar ha'amor lahalan edim shnayim, afkan edim shnayim. The Gemara makes this huge chasm, a world of difference, even though it's so, in the words, it's hard to distinguish. We have to listen above the words. What's happening here? If you have a woman who is suspect to be a sotah, and one man shows up and says, I know she slept with someone, done. She's not a sotah. We trust him midoraisa to say they actually slept together. No me sotah. She's divorced without a ksuba, and all the ripple effects of the decision that she made to sleep with a man that wasn't her husband after kinui and stira. But in a case where it's no kinui and stira, a woman sleeps with a man, she shouldn't have. Psukim and chumash, iser, aser, sreifa, whatever the punishments are. But there's only 1 aid to testify. We don't even believe the 1 aid. The 180 is a chiddush by Sotah that we believe one man to say Rachel slept with Shimon. I saw it. I know it happened. But stam outside of the Sotah world in general by Niyuf, 180 is insufficient to verify that she actually did that crime. Huge differences. And therefore, let's just reverse engineer to what we started with. If the formula doesn't go like this, kinui plus stira, and then we have a single aid, then we don't trust a single aid ever. The single aid is only trusted in the context of Sotah. But when it's a regular case of niyuf, there we need two aidim to verify that she actually did what she did. And I wish this Gemara came a little earlier because we've been using this phrase of Rishona and Shnia, and says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan, 2 lines from the bottom, Ezo hi Eidos HaRishona, Zo Eidos Stira, Eidos Achrona, Zo Eidos Tuma, which would have been nice to have 20 lines ago, but we still figured it out. All right, let's talk about shiur stira. Top of Dalet Amud Aleph. Let's continue. The Gemara says, V'kama shiur stira. When we say that there's kinui, we know what kinui is, that a husband says to the wife, Al tadabri mish ploni. How long is stira? So listen to the shita of the first Tana. The first Tana has 4 parameters. Listen. V'kama shiur stira, top line, Kedei tuma, kedei bia, kedei ha'ara, kedei hakafas dekel divi Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel gives a 4-pronged answer, and we need to understand all 4 pieces. We'll analyze in a few. First, he says kedei tuma, the amount of time it takes to have intercourse. Says the Gemara kedei bia, which is the time of intercourse. The tuma is generated through intercourse, which is kedei ha'ara. The minimum parameter is minor penetration, which is just a minimal amount of the atara being nichnas l'osam makom. And kedei hakafas dekel, the time it takes to walk around the dekel tree. It's a very short amount of time. It doesn't take long. That's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Eliezer Omer kedei mizig asakos. The amount of time it takes to dilute a cup of wine, also very short. Says the Gemara. Rabbi Yeshua Omer kedei lishtoso, to drink the wine. Ben Azai Omer kedei litzlos beitza, the amount of time it takes to roast, to fry an egg. Rabbi Kiva Omer kedei legoma, the amount of time it takes to eat the egg. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer kedei ligmoa shlosha beitzim zu acharzu, to swallow 3 eggs, one after the other. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah Omer kedei likshor gardi nima, the amount of time it takes for a weaver to tie the 2 ends of a string. Chanan ben Pinchas Omer kedei shetoshid yada lesoch pia litol kisem, she was eating something got stuck in her teeth. The amount of time it takes for her to remove that from her mouth is the amount of time of stira. And Plimo Omer, we've seen this name before a couple times in Shas, kedei shetoshid yada lesal litol kikar, the amount of time it takes to reach into a basket and to remove a piece of bread. And in regards to that, Lashita of Plimo, a nice little remez in the pasuk. All of these are the various shitas of how long stira is. One thing is clear: the Isser D'Oraisa of Yichud that we typically speak about is way longer than this. This is talking about the minimum amount of time it takes for the Isser, the actual transactional Isser of intercourse to take place, whereby we should fear that she is now a Sotah. So now we've added an element to our formula. We know what kinui is. Al tistari, al tadabri imish ploni. And stira is to be alone for this super short amount of time. Seconds to be alone with that man makes her eligible for the Sotah. If it's less than that amount of time, the door closes for 1/10 of a second. She opens the door, it's not a Sotah. Closes for 30 seconds, Sotah. Huge nafkaminas l'maisa. Huge nafkaminas. Now let's analyze the first shita that we saw, the 4-pronged approach of Rabbi Yishmael. Says the Gemara, B'chol hani lamali. Why do we need to have all 4 of these things that are quoted at the top of the page? The Gemara says, Tzriche, I'll tell you exactly why. Di'itana kedei tuma. If you want to say we're talking about tuma, which is broadly referring to intercourse, havamina kedei tumasa ve'artzosa. I would have thought that it's not just intercourse, but it's also the ritzui is ensuring that she is interested in tashmish amita, which is not 5 seconds. So therefore it could be longer. Kamash malan kedei bia, no. We're saying kedei tuma, which is kedei bia, it's just the amount of time for intercourse without the ritzui. Oh, v'itana kedei bia, but if I would have only had the word kedei bia, havamina kedei gemar bia, that it's a full process of intercourse, which is not true. Kamash malan kedei hara, just the amount of time for partial penetration. Just the atara being nichnas la'osamakom. V'yashmina kedei hara, if I only had the case that was taught, if I only had the parameter of hara, partial penetration, havamina kedei hara v'artosa, that it's not just that, but it's also the ritzui process of ensuring that she is a willing participant. Kamash malan kedei tuma. We need all of these answers. They're all one. They're all one. The amount of time it takes for ha'ara, which is a very short amount of time, that's how long the stira has to be. How long is that? Kedei ha'ara, kedei hakafas dekel, which is the amount of time for this partial minimal penetration and the amount of time it takes to walk around the dekel tree. All of that is Brisa number 1. But Brisa number 2 does not match up very well in regards to both the names of the people talking and the content by the names of who the Tanaim were that we were dealing with. Minhi. Halfway down, 2 lines before the wide lines, we're going to be going to the second to last line on the page, and that's where we will be stopping for the night. What does the new brisa say? The pasuk says Vinistera in regards to the Sotah. The Kama Shiur Sira, this brisa says Lo Shamanu, we don't know. Oh, and then Kshehu Omer V'hinitma. Oh, now when it says V'hinitma, now that there's impurity, which is Tashma Shamita, now we know. Ave Omer Kedei Tuma, Kedei Bia, Kedei Hara, Kedei Chazar Sedekel Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. Wait a second. Look at the top line, 3rd line down. Who did we say? Rabbi Shmuel. The 4-pronged approach in the first Mishnah was Rabbi Shmuel. Now the 4-pronged approach in the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer. That's going to be one of our questions. Rabbi Yoshua Omer Kedei Mezigas Hakos. That's interesting because on the 3rd line of this page, Rabbi Eliezer was the one who said that. Ben Azai Omer Kedei Lishtoso. Ben Azai says it was the one who drinks it. That was Rabbi Yoshua in the previous price. It doesn't match. Rabbi Kiva Omer Kedei Litzos Pesa, to roast the egg. Rabbi Huda Ben Meser Omer Kedei Legoma. That's how long it takes to swallow it. That's tira. Fine. A lot of different shittas that don't match up. And the Gemara is going to call all of them out. Says the Gemara, wait one second. Kasal Kadaitach. Hainu hakofas dekel, hainu chazoras dekel. If you look on the 2nd line of this page, we refer to the parameter of stira as walking around a dekel tree. And if you look at the very first long line of this page, halfway down, it says kadei chazoras dekel, when a tree moves in the wind, which is different. So let's see. Says the Gemara, Hasam Amar Rabbi Shmuel kadei Hasam Amar Rabbi Shmuel kadei hakofas dekel upalag Rabbi Eliezer alei. But Hacha Amar Rabbi Eliezer kadei chazoras dekel. So we see that hakafas dekel and chazar dekel can't be the same. Says the Gemara, Amar Abaye, hakafa beregel, chazara beruach. What is hakafa? That's the amount of time it takes for you to walk around the tree. But chazara is the wind, when the wind moves the tree. So you have one person who's walking around the palm tree, and the other one is the measurement of time when a tree sways because of the wind. And by Ravashi, chazara beruach ki hechi da'azul v'hadar. When we say that the tree is moving, is it just that the tree moved 1, 2, and then it's done? Or no, that it just moves back and forth. The amount of time it takes until it actually stops moving. We don't know the answer to that question. All right, Hasam over there in Bryson number 1 at the top of the page, Amar Rabbi Eliezer Kedei Mezigas Hakos, and Hacha Kedei Chazaras Dekel. Different, the Rabbi Eliezer is a steer within himself. Says the Gemara, no, they're exactly the same shiur, no machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer's. They are all the same. Chazaras Dekel and Mezigas Hakos is the same amount of time. Again, we don't have seconds put to this, but it's really a super short time for stira. Hasam over there in the first price, Rabbi Shua Kedei Lishtoso. He was the one who said it take that the amount of stira is the amount of time it takes to drink the wine. And Hacha Amar Kedei Mezigas Hakos, it's the amount of time not to drink the wine, but rather to dilute the wine. So says the Gemara, really we should combine them, not that they're the same. Ema Kedei Limzog Vidlishtos. It's a longer shiur. First dilute and drink. It could be a minute instead of 30 seconds. Says the Gemara, why would you not say who just say that Mezigas Hakos and Shtias Hakos is the same shiur? That way there's no steer in the brayso. Says we don't have to combine the shitas and add them one to the other. Says the Gemara, we can't do that. In Cain, if we did that, Hainu Rabbi Eliezer, that would be the same exact sheet as Rabbi Eliezer. We can't do that, therefore we had to combine. Hasam over there in the first brayso, 2/3 of the way down, a little bit more, halfway through the wide line. Hasam over there in the first brayso on the page, Amar Ben Azai Kedei Litlos Beitza. There he said that it was roasting an egg. That was the shiur for stira. And Hacha Amar Kedei Lishtoso. Here he says it's the amount of time to drink the wine. Says the Gemara, they're the same exact shiur, no stira. Next, Hasam Amar Rabbi Akiva Kedei Legoma. In the first mission, Rabbi Akiva said the amount of time for stira was to swallow the egg. And Hacha Amar Kedei Litzlos, it was to roast the egg. Says the Gemara, Ema Kedei Litzlos Beitza Ulagoma. Oh, it's a longer shiur. It's not only to fry the egg, but it's also to eat it. Here too, asking the same question as we saw earlier. Why don't you say that the tzlias beitza and the gemias beitza is the same amount of time? Can't do that because in Cain, hainu ben azai, that would be the same shita as ben azai, that would be a stira. So we had no choice but to combine the shitas instead of saying that they were one and the same. Another question. In the first brayso on the page defining stira, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says it's to eat 3 eggs, one after the other. But hach amar kedei legoma, it's only to swallow 1 egg. It's a stira. Says the Gemara, no. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira wasn't only talking about his own shita. It's the dvar of Rabbi Akiva Kamar. The Kamar misharin betzliya uvigmiya and ema shir gmiya lechuda kedei ligmoa shalosh beitzim zoacharzu dahainu tzliya ugmiya. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira was just speaking on behalf of Rabbi Akiva, and therefore it's not a stira in Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira. Up in the top of the first brayso, we saw we're now at the 2 dots, 5 lines from the bottom. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yirmiyah Omer Kadei Sheik Shor Garde Nima, that if the weaver is able to tie these weaves together, these strands together, all is fine and good. That's the shiur stira. Says the Gemara, Boy Ravashi, the Merchako de Mekare. Are we dealing with strings that are both of them are in my hands and they're easy to tie? Or do I have to pull one string all the way from the right, another one from the left, and pull them together and work very hard to tie them, which is a longer shiur? To that, the Gemara says, take it, we don't know the answer to that. The Gemara then said, Chanin ben Pinchas Omer Kadesh Toshid Yada L'Soch Pia Litol Kisem. Person has something stuck in their teeth and she's working to get it out of her teeth. That's the shiur of stira. We've all had things stuck in our teeth. You ever get popcorn stuck? You got to go get the dental floss and you got to weave it out. And then you start bleeding because you don't floss regularly. Oh, it's a whole sugya. So says the Gemara, which one is it? Boy Ravashi, the Mahadik, was it really stuck? Yeah, the mom had to work on it and dig and try to get it out. Oh, Dilma, no Dilma. Oh, or perhaps the Loma Hadik, it wasn't easy. It wasn't so hard to take out. You just a little mouthwash, a little water, and the whole thing. I'll take it. We don't know the answer to that. We do this one. We're going to stop right here. We'll stop at Plimo. Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll do a blot and a half and then be caught up just so we can fall behind again. Wishing you all a beautiful night.